think maybe we can start. It's yeah. Okay. Well, I would like to welcome everyone to this today's webinar, organized by the UFRO Task Force on Post-Conflict Forest Landscape Restoration. My name is John Parata. I am the former president of UFRO, the International Union of Forest Research Organizations, and we're very happy to have as our speaker today, Kama Bouazza. She'll be speaking to us from her home in Beirut. But before we begin with the webinar, I'd like to first tell you a few things about how this session is going to go, and then make some introductory remarks about UFRO and our task force. And then, of course, we'll have the seminar, which will last for Kama's presentation, which will last for about 30 minutes, after which we'll have an open session for question and answers, discussion. And if it goes beyond an hour, the whole session, that's okay. People can stay on. If they need to leave, I think an hour is probably about what we will need for this webinar. So during the course, this webinar is being recorded. I hope that's going to be okay for everyone. And during the course of the webinar, if you have any questions that you'd like to pose to Kama, or any general questions about UFRO that may be addressed by me, you can put that in the chat, and we'll do our best to cover all the the points and questions raised during this session. And after Kama's presentation, we'll again handle those questions and open the floor for the discussion. So with that, let me just say a few words about UFRO. Okay, I hope everyone can see that. I'm a bit of a novice here. Okay. Let's see. There we go. Okay. Okay. I hope people can see that. So you should nod. Maybe Medina can nod.
Looks great. It looks great.
Okay. Thank you. I'm a real amateur with this. Yeah, UFRO is the International Union of Forest Research Organizations. We are the global network for forest science collaboration. What are we? We're a non-profit, non-governmental international network of forest scientists worldwide, with a headquarters located in Vienna. Our global network is completely voluntary. It's open to all individuals and organizations, and it's dedicated to forests and forest products research and related disciplines. We have, I should note that we have, we have over 600 organizations that are institutional members, as well as many hundreds of individual members. We have objectives are pretty simple. Our overall objective is to advance research excellence and knowledge sharing, and to foster the development of science-based solutions for all sorts of forest-related challenges, for the benefit not only of forests, but for people who depend on forests. We provide a diverse thematic structure for forest-related research, and within this structure, we have hundreds and hundreds of scientists who collaborate and lead units within this structure on a voluntary basis. We strive to address the research needs and priorities of our member organizations, as well as stakeholders, including policy and decision makers, forest practitioners, industry, and civil society. So for those of you who aren't very familiar with UFRO, I would encourage you to maybe learn a little bit more about us on our website. It's ufro.org. It has many benefits. I can attest to that. I've been involved in UFRO for over 30 years, and my career, my life would not be the same. I have much to thank UFRO for. It's, of course, this very diverse and large organization. It has a leadership, and our current president is Professor Daniela Kleinschmidt from Freiburg University. She's ably assisted by her two vice presidents, Udam Chung and Elena Pauletti. and supported by a fantastic IUFRO headquarters staff in Vienna, led by Mr. Alexander Buch. So very briefly about the IUFRO structure, I mentioned the thematic network a structure that facilitates collaboration. This occurs within 9 divisions. The disciplinary oriented. There's a division, for example, forest environment. There's one on forest economics and policy. There's one on genetics and physiology. Many different, covering the full range of topics, within which there are smaller research groups and working parties that have more specialized interests, as well as a number of IUFRO programs and special projects that are coordinated primarily through the IUFRO headquarters in Vienna. And last but not least, we have 13 task forces. And what are the task forces? The task forces are interdisciplinary groups that are established by the IUFRO board to advance forest science collaboration, focusing on key issues that have a particular relevance to policymaking and the needs of the forest sector. Through these task forces, we seek to develop expanded global collaboration and information sharing on these particular issues or topics. And our work, most task forces consists of some combination of meetings, workshops, publications, or books or issues of journals, presentations in major international meetings, and of course, other information sharing activities such as this webinar series. Our task force coordinators are non-voting members of the IUFRO board, and they attend all of the major board meetings during their 5-year lifespan. The coordinator of this task force is Marine Elbakij, who's been a very dynamic leader of our task force, and she is joining us for this webinar as well. Okay, so this task force, conflict landscape restoration, complements a lot of other kinds of work that IUFRO has been doing for many years on forests and forest landscape restoration, but the focus of this one has to do with basically picking up the pieces in the wake of armed conflicts, of which there are far too many going on at present. There are particular challenges, as we all know and can imagine, associated with post-conflict forest landscapes, particular challenges relating to the condition and the hazards inherent in the forests of these landscapes, the disruption and destruction of communities and their relationships with their lands and including their forests. So a number of special elements of the work of restoring landscapes in a post-conflict situation. So this task force, seeks to bring together experts and people with experience in such situations to share their knowledge and to find ways through the very difficult special challenges that are presented in post-conflict situations. And ultimately, our goal is to provide high-quality, cutting-edge scientific knowledge and innovative solutions to understand the threats and impacts on forest landscapes and people in post-conflict settings, with the aim of supporting policymakers, decision makers, and all relevant stakeholders. With that, I would very cordially invite to join us Karma, but I will say a few words about our speaker today. Karma Bouazza has worked as a native plant and ecological restoration specialist for over 15 years with a number of private and public organizations and institutions. She's developed and supported programs and projects across a number of different ecosystems in many parts of the world, but with a particular focus on the Near East and North Africa. She's currently the chair of the board of directors of the Society for Ecological Restoration, which is, I think, a mark of how well respected she is in the broader uh, restoration community, and has been very active in a number of very important publications of the Society for Ecological Restoration, including the standards for practice to guide ecosystem restoration under the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, her aims at present are to continue to contribute to the advancement of ecosystem restoration at a global scale and bring her passion for disseminating her knowledge and experience to practitioners worldwide, um, including and particularly with local indigenous communities. With that, kindly invite Karma to make her presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, John. Thank you very much. And um, it's really great being here with you. And I just want to note that being part of the task force, the IUFRO task force, post-conflict task force, has been really amazing, and I'm learning a lot and sharing a lot of experience with other members from this task force, which is great. So I hope I can't see anyone or any reaction. I hope you can see my screen well, and you can hear me well. Okay, so today I will be presenting a very light presentation about how to integrate ecosystem-based adaptation principles in post-conflict landscapes, and how we can integrate into the planning of restoration projects also. So I won't be sharing the science behind how to plan a restoration project. All the science and research, a lot of great publications are out there, but I want to share some of my experience in post-conflict restoration planning, and some nice examples to share about what we need to really think about and keep in mind when we are planning for restoration projects, especially in post-conflict, where we have a lot of marginalized groups that are highly affected by conflicts. And on this note, I will be focusing on the MENA region, talking about how also climate change and conflicts are interrelated, and how they're impacting natural resources in the MENA region, and most importantly, livelihoods of local indigenous groups. This is why from our work with a lot of my colleagues that I will also be presenting here, we need to think of integrating approaches that are more sustainable, not only on the ecological level, but also for those marginalized communities that are impacted by conflict. So I will be giving a few examples, nice pictures, not a lot of text, and some key takeaways and recommendations from this webinar. So the MENA region, I think everyone is pretty much familiar where the MENA region is. And I appreciate what the World Bank always presents as data on climate change and the impact of climate change on different regions. So this is just a small summary of some of the reports they have presented, and how climate change will impact the MENA region in the future. Three main categories that are very interesting is the temperature rise, where we will see extreme high temperatures that could reach up to 56, and it could become the norm in a lot of the areas and countries in the MENA region. Precipitation variability, where we can see it right now, it will worsen droughts and floods at the same time, where we have rainfall variability, and the pattern of rainfall is changing drastically. Sometimes we have a week or two of heavy rainfalls, and then followed by a month of drought in the winter. And the heavy rainfalls would worsen floods that directly impact livelihoods of marginalized communities. So we will see, because a lot of the most of the countries in the MENA region have coastal borders also. And we will be looking at sea level rise that will affect a lot of the coastal communities that depend on the natural capital of coastal ecosystems also. So this is, from this, I will be sharing how to integrate some interventions, ecosystem-based adaptation interventions into restoration planning later on. And I cannot see any chat or anything. So John, Marine, I will depend on you to just unmute and say anything. So definitely this is not new. The MENA region is a region that is highly affected by ongoing conflicts. And yes, I do like to make a lot of those cute infographics and things like this, but with climate change and conflicts are really just interrelated for me. When we have extreme climate change events, it will definitely exacerbate domestic political conflicts, especially when most of the communities depend on natural resources, and climate change affects a lot availability and sustainability of natural resources. And from the domestic political conflicts, we have regional conflicts that are also affected by the geopolitical context. And the geopolitical context is affected by the domestic political conflicts. So imagine if we don't have climate change. Imagine if we don't have domestic conflicts, how better it would be for a lot of those marginalized communities and for sustaining livelihoods for many, many groups of people. And here, the impacts of climate change, again, they're interrelated with impacts of conflict, where from conflict we have destruction of big surfaces of the ecosystems, migration and displacement, and economic decline. And the impact of climate change will also lead to more economic decline because of other issues such as water shortage, droughts, high temperature, rising sea levels. And as you see in the map, that the MENA region is surrounded by coastal ecosystems, inland, terrestrial, and others. So there's this one quote that I also like from the World Bank MENA Climate Roadmap report, that countries in the Middle East and North Africa must accelerate system-wide transformations and develop long-term pathways to build low-carbon resilient societies, promote inclusive development, peace and stability in the region. So this is the map of Lebanon. This is where I'm from. This is where I'm based right now. And you can see the land use and land cover of the Lebanese areas, where a lot of the modified natural and semi-natural types of habitats are connected. You can see from this map that agriculture areas are also very much connected with wooded lands and artificial areas. So in that quote, when we talk about resilient societies, we can't really just have resilient societies without thinking of resilient ecosystems, and here more specifically, resilient forests. For resilient forest, we need proper habitat connectivity, improved biodiversity, genetic variability. And for resilient societies, especially in the MENA region, we talk about securing water security, food systems that are sustainable, and economic variability. But both when we talk about resilient forests and resilient societies, we talk about resilient natural capital. And this is where ecosystem-based adaptation interventions that is integrated into restoration planning is very important. We think of resilient societies and resilient ecosystems at the same time when we develop plans for restoration. So this is why ecosystem-based adaptation in the MENA region is I won't say it's the future, but is important to integrate when we talk about restoring ecosystems and improving livelihoods. So I will just talk about briefly some key principles that are important to take into consideration when we want to talk about integrating ecosystem-based adaptation into restoration planning and taking into consideration climate and conflict-affected areas both. For me, and this could be something to discuss after the webinar, and I would love to hear also others' opinions on this. But for me, three key principles are, first, we need to promote ecosystem resilience. What we need to really think, what is the capacity of forests to withstand disturbances from climate change and from conflicts also, and how can we recover from such disturbances, if it's from climate change or conflict. And I will go through each one and give more examples in the next few slides. The second principle is employing a participatory approach. Who are the stakeholders that will ensure not only the ecological impact, but also societal and policy impact? And here we talk about participatory approach, not only on the level of informing people, but how we really want to integrate the different types of stakeholders. And the third principle would be to operate at multiple scale. Yes, in a lot of projects, we work on site level, and we focus on who is affected by climate change and conflict, but how can we integrate that on the landscape level planning? It's important to operate on multiple scales, on the site level and on the landscape level, so we can really promote sustainable impacts if it's on the ecological or socioeconomic or policy impact. So those three principles are important to build an integrated approach for resilience-focused restoration in conflict-affected area. People look for resilient societies, resilient ecosystems. So these three key principles will help in providing immediate benefits to conflict-affected communities. Conflict-affected communities look for immediate benefits. But how can we think of immediate benefits and integrated into restoration planning also? These are called like no regret measures, where we need to have immediate benefits for marginalized communities and groups. These key principles will also help in prioritizing a community-led governance approach. In a lot of conflict areas and post-conflict, the national-led governance is disturbed, is disrupted. We can't just focus on the national-led governance. We need to promote a community-led governance approach also. It will also help reduce tensions through improved livelihoods. What is important for people is to have sustainable livelihoods, is to have a decent lifestyle through sustained livelihoods. It will also promote a participatory monitoring, which I think this is a part where people feel more engaged when they monitor their own success, where they are there to monitor and improve, and they are more engaged not only in the implementation, but also in the monitoring process. And also, it is important in building a strong local expertise and local decision-making mechanisms. And I think this is also linked to the community-led governance approach, where local decisions can be made without going to the higher level decision makers also. So I will go through each one of these principles, and I will keep the time in check also. Um, so the first principle, when we talk about promoting an ecosystem resilience, what is promoting ecosystem resilience? Again, is how our forests or our ecosystems can withstand disturbances. If it's from drought, climate drought, lower rainfalls, lower precipitation levels, flood events, and conflicts, which sometimes we cannot really, control, but we can recover from degraded or destroyed ecosystems and areas post-conflict. So I always like to think of what is our forest genetic material. We need to have a resilient forest genetic material to be able to promote overall also ecosystem resilience. So we need to understand the adaptive capacity of the genetic material. Sometimes we go into a seed zone and we see that some seed provenances are not, producing good and viable seeds. Why is this? How is this affected by climate change, for instance? And this is why we need to ensure reproductive success of species also, and taking into consideration future climatic conditions and how this will affect habitat shifts. So in this map here from the Lebanon Reforestation Initiative, the NGO I work with in Lebanon, this is a map of habitat shift per species. I won't go into the detail, but it's very important to see the red are the possible shifting zones per species. And when we talk about ecosystem resilience and how we integrate this into our planning, we need to understand how a species is affected by climate change and conflicts and study the habitat shifts. So overall, this will lead us to a sustainable management of genetic resources also. One concept that was introduced to me by my colleague, Anthony Davis, is the target plant concept. I really like this concept, and it works in different contexts. It could work on the climate change context, post-conflict context, or just purely ecological context also. It's when we identify our objectives. Why are we restoring? What's our main objective for restoring? And then identify the limiting factors at the site level. What will hinder my success? And based on those two, on the objective and the limiting factor, I can really identify what would be the best forest genetic material that I can select or produce or use and integrate into my restoration planning. So for the second principle, employing a participatory approach, where again, it's not only about informing stakeholders. How do we really get those stakeholders, and who are the stakeholders that will benefit from restoration? Not only benefit, but ensure sustainable impact and sustainable positive impact of our projects. Here, I like this picture, and that picture, that map are linked, because this is, again, a project we did in northern Lebanon, where we identified the marginalized groups and micro communities such as farmers. And they helped us in identifying key zones that are of interest for them for promoting livelihoods, sustainable livelihoods, and also key areas to conserve forest and restore forest. So we and that was in that workshop, we use a transdisciplinary approach where not only we had just communities and one type of stakeholders, we had different types of stakeholders. We had researchers, we had mapping experts, we had local community, local authorities, we had representatives from the ministry. And that exercise led to a community-based adaptation options that you see here in the map. And it's one village that we can see here, a part of a larger landscape. So we had people from different communities, different villages coming together. Each village definitely was planning on the site level, but they all came together so we can plan on the landscape level and think more broadly, scaling up, thinking at multiple scales. So the key points were to include marginalized groups that are mostly affected by conflicts, have a really well-developed participatory mapping and planning approach, and understanding land tenure systems, which again, we learned a lot from our local communities and the marginalized groups, and to include that local indigenous knowledge within our planning. This will improve conflict resolution because when we talk about domestic conflict, also national level conflict, it is exacerbated with climate change, where we have mainly lack of natural resources, and the most important is water in the MENA region. The third principle that is always important is how can we operate at a multiple scale, not only the site level planning, but how can we integrate the site level planning into a landscape level planning. The site level planning, usually we're targeting 1 or 2 habitats. But at the landscape level planning, we're targeting a mosaic of habitats where we can have more impact on the ground if we actually integrate our site level planning into a landscape level planning. So there's this, the restorative continuum. I'm pretty sure a lot of people in the webinar are somehow familiar with the Society of Ecological Restoration, the restorative continuum. And I like about this picture, it really shows you how different habitats, modified, semi-natural, natural habitats are connected. If we focus on one type, it won't really bring and it won't really restore ecosystems, and it won't lead to resilient ecosystems. So when we just talk about agriculture lands and we restore agriculture lands using nature-based solutions, it doesn't mean that it will be sustained. It doesn't mean that it will be part of a larger mosaic of habitats and resilient ecosystem. So yes, we have to think about habitat connectivity, not only natural habitats, but also semi-natural and modified habitat connectivity, and how everything is connected, and how we can, through improved genetic diversity and ecological processes, how these can lead to climate change adaptation. Most importantly, for instance, a few examples are the resistance to pests and diseases, decreased disturbance regimes from floods and fires. So this is why not only thinking of site level planning, but landscape level planning would be very much beneficial. So I just want to present here a few case studies. I won't call them case studies, examples. And again, I won't go into the details of how we develop and plan ecosystem restoration projects. Again, many standards are out there, international standards, such as the standards of practice to guide ecosystem restoration, are there to give you what's, I tried to put the font right, but this is a very hard picture or graph to be able to increase, but the steps to really develop a proper restoration plan and implement. But I won't go into the details of this. I will just go into each of the conditions that we have identified for from climate change impacts, and give some maybe key considerations for selecting interventions. So for the first one, the temperature rise. Yes, it is global warming is global. And in the MENA region, again, when summer temperatures are expected to reach 56 in some areas, and summer temperatures would be up to 8 degrees warmer in some parts, also such as in Algeria and Saudi Arabia and Iraq. We have to think of those three principles and what to integrate into those three principles and what are the considerations to take within those three key principles that we were talking about. So for instance, if I have an area where is impacted by extreme higher temperatures, how can we promote ecosystem resilience? By increasing natural habitats. People need shade. Animals, wildlife need shade, cooler, and it will provide cooler temperatures. For instance, diversify the forest structure and composition and select genetic provenances adapted to warmer conditions. Yes, this will involve a lot of modeling, a lot of field work, research, but these are key considerations that are important to take when we want to promote ecosystem resilience in areas where they are prone to extreme high temperatures and temperature rise. And definitely within employing a participatory approach, we need to integrate traditional knowledge and relate it to sustainable resource management. Not go to conventional practices, but really think about traditional knowledge to integrate into our planning. Engage micro communities in the mapping and the planning process. Not only large communities, but micro communities such as farmers, fishermen, those really communities that specialize in one type of livelihood, for instance. And focus on improving the local governance model to prioritize proper and sustainable collaborations. We need, especially when we talk about conflict areas, this will include a lot of conflict resolution, workshops, meetings, expertise, also into improving the local governance. And for working at multiple scale, we talked about integrating the idea of connecting between semi-natural modified and natural habitats. One example is agroecology principles are very good, as a good example of how we can create a connectivity between modified landscapes such as agriculture and natural landscapes such as protected areas. And this will improve in promoting connectivity between habitats and ensure that species have the capacity to migrate, ensure species movement overall through improved habitat connectivity. One example that I will talk about agroecology or agroforestry practices. These are two pictures from Lebanon. One is in the south of Lebanon in Nabatieh, which is an abandoned bare land. And you can, and one is in Hasbaya, Lebanon, also. You can see that both of them are degraded now landscapes, but also if you look at how they are connected to the more forested, still degraded, but forest landscapes uphill a bit here. So you can see that connection also. And because of conventional practices, because of not really thinking about how to promote ecosystem resilience, this is not only affecting the actual abandoned lands, but also the surrounding habitats, natural habitats. This is leading to farmers going and cutting more wood from the forest and degrading the forest more because they're not, their land isn't productive as before. So this is a nice sketch that also was published by LRI's agroforestry team, where it helps us understand that conventional practices are not working alone, and working alone on improving agricultural lands and making it more productive is not also working. We need to think of how to connect agricultural lands, those productive lands, and the natural habitats such as forest, and create that connectivity between the two. Once we do that, we think of how we can really have resilient and connected habitats. In that case, I think of, for farmers, decreased pest occurrence, more water availability through, water infiltration rates, healthier soils. And these are two also other examples. One is in Lebanon and one is in Morocco. You can see in the picture on the left side, productive fruit trees that are productive fruit trees land that is adjacent to an oak woodland plot in the northern part of Lebanon. It looks nice. It looks diverse. You can see the diversity of genetic material in that picture, and for me, it looks nicer than the two other pictures here. And one that I stole from the chapter from John. Thank you, John, for also that chapter in Morocco, where the idea of creating kind of an oasis, but not just an oasis, but a sustainable and resilient oasis system in Morocco, where it provides shade, it provides food, a more sustainable food system in an area that is very much arid also. And these are examples that actually that work. And we can see the difference not only on the site level, but on an overall landscape level. The second one we will talk about is the precipitation variability and how to deal with precipitation variability through integrating some of those ecosystem-based adaptation interventions. All of them, we have to think of promoting ecosystem resilience, employing participatory approach, and working at a multiple scale. The only difference here is what is the genetic material to be used, for instance. And this is where we see more drought. We need to think of more drought-tolerant species. We need to think of the growth characteristics of the species itself also. We need to diversify more the structure and composition of our ecosystem and habitat. We need to select genetic provenances that are adapted to drier conditions. And this is where the whole mapping and shift of habitat is very important also. Improve water infiltration and underground recharge mechanism through simple and cost-effective techniques. And increase micro topographic variations to improve seedling establishment. And this is very much site-specific when we talk about microtopography features. But for me, in some areas, it helped in improving seedling establishment, especially when we have places that are having increased droughts. And employing participatory approach, again, we still need to focus about who are the micro communities that are heavily affected by drought and floods that are getting worse, and integrating, again, traditional knowledge and focusing on local governance. So this is definitely something that is very much cross-cutting. Apologies if you see a cat crossing. These are my cats, and I apologize from now. Working at multiple scales is, again, we need to promote that connectivity between habitats and always ensuring the capacity for species to move and migrate also. This is, again, one picture from Google Earth. that me and my colleagues from the Lebanon Reforestation Initiative worked on in an area that is very arid and very much affected by drought. This is in Shad, in the Bekaa in Lebanon, and you can see remnants of a forest, some newly planted areas, and our main area here that you can see in nice shaped polygons, hand-drawn polygons. Um, and in this area, you can see also the surrounding agricultural lands that are highly affected by drought. It's very hard to develop a plan for a restoration plan for such a degraded area. And this area is being also affected by the current war happening in Lebanon. And our colleagues are still working there also. So this is where it was important to think of the genetic material, the drought tolerance, the growth characteristics, and the grazing tolerance of each of the species we wanted to use, and identify the microtopography features of the area. Because in that same bigger polygon, we have rocky areas, we have shallow canals, and we have bassa also. So even the water flow within that small area it's not uniform. So to plan our revegetation models, two examples. I'm going to say two examples. If the species has high drought tolerance, but there are slow growing species, then we prefer to specify the rocky area to be able to plant those species on them. And a second example of how we took the microtopography feature into consideration, if the species has a medium drought tolerance and medium growth, we wanted to select the areas where we have more water catchment within the shallow canals and the bassin. So again, in a very small area, it was a very different revegetation models that needed to be used according to the native species that we wanted to grow. So if this model is successful, you can see we won't stop here. We have a lot more work to do that connects all the different types of lands around this. Another example I will take from Jordan, and these maps are from ICARDA. They took those maps, satellite imagery from 2025, and the work was done with the NGO Wadi, also last year in 2025 in Wadi Ratam Azra in Jordan. And you can see our project area is within a bigger Azra watershed where we have a diversity of habitats and an important wetland reserve also which is called the Azra Wetland Reserve. But you can see in the picture on the left here, and this is the project area and the study area. I'm not going to call it the project area, but the study area, which is very close to the wetland reserve, which is here downstream. And near we have the village and where people, the communities live. But this area is very much hit by drought and floods. So because of very different rainfall patterns, flood is affecting extreme floods and worsens floods are affecting the area. And at the same time, it's affecting livelihoods of people that are living around the area. So these are the formation of gullies because of land degradation, soil erosion, and extreme floods, flood events. You can see in this area, we can get heavy rainfalls for 1 week and then nothing for a month. And after those heavy rainfalls, the flood events just increase the degradation of the area. But we can learn from nature also, and we know how nature works to stabilize soil, to improve water infiltration and decrease flood risks and intensity of floods, and to sustain and improve people's livelihoods. So sometimes we think about how to mimic nature and how to stabilize soil, improve water infiltration, water, which is very important in that area, um, especially that it is one of the poorest areas in water and heavily affected by drought, and how to sustain and improve people's livelihoods through improved soil, more stable soil, and better water availability also throughout the year. So sometimes the interventions are just studying what already works and how nature works, and really try to replicate this on a larger scale. So, and I'm sorry if, am I still good with time, John and Maureen? Yeah, I will go quicker a bit. And finally, for the sea level rise, most of the MENA region countries have coastal borders, and um, and it has been now a really high risk, the sea level rise around the MENA region. So again, here we think of the same approaches for promoting ecosystem resilience. But here we are restoring different types of habitats which need different types of genetic material. For dunes, mangroves, coral reefs, we need to think of maybe more a salt-tolerant genetic material to stabilize shorelines. And when we talk about working at multiple scale, we need to think of seascape to landscape, promote connectivity not only at the seascape level, but from the seascape to the landscape levels, and to be able to restore the tidal flows, to be especially that we have very large number of communities that are living on the coastal and coastal habitats and coastal ecosystems. So here, when we think of integrating, employing the participatory approach, we think of fishermen, for instance, to be able to engage in the planning process and follow-up. So again, I don't have much. I work more on terrestrial ecosystems. So I didn't have much personal examples, but a good, there are many good resources coming out from the Gulf regions, from Saudi Arabia, that really discuss how we can integrate ecosystem-based restoration and how to promote connectivity on the coastal habitats, also to alleviate the impact of sea rise, sea level rise also. So I know I don't have much time left, but some key takeaways from this and how to really think about planning restoration projects in post-conflict or conflict areas is to always have an inclusive participation along the process, along the way. Long-term success really depends on involving local communities, micro-communities, and indigenous groups. Land tenure is really important to take into consideration, and securing the land rights is very much critical, especially for marginalized groups who often lack such legal ownership. Right-based approaches improve outcome also, strengthening the community's land rights, which is linked to the land tenure takeaway. And definitely, one size fits all doesn't work. Restoration reflects on the different ecological, cultural, socio-economic realities, and we need to integrate those different contexts and different approaches into one larger approach. So we really have to be context specific here. And local knowledge is a major asset. We have to really learn more about the local indigenous insights that are presented by the local communities, indigenous groups, and think beyond boundaries. Think on a landscape level always, not just, and how we can connect habitats to be able to reach ecosystem resilience. So I will finish by giving some key recommendations. First, really think, especially in conflict-affected areas, strengthen land and resource rights. Support the recognition of a community's ownership, and support them legally also, not only in workshops or talking about it, and ensure quick economic benefits. People need quick economic benefits. Sometimes working with nature, it can be quick enough, but if we can integrate income generating activities and poverty alleviation into restoration efforts, this is key in post-conflict restoration efforts. And definitely adopting participatory approaches, even through monitoring phases of any project. It will enable the communities to track their progress. And definitely there are many low-cost indicators and tools that can be used. And scale up strategically. Implement restoration at larger scales, at watershed level scale, for instance, that would have a greater impact and promote more resilience, also not only for ecosystems, but for societies that are part of the ecosystems. And invest in capacity building, not only just informing how to do things, but really create that local expertise. Take time, even if it's for a month, even if your project is only about creating local expertise, focus on creating local expertise. And definitely, I will finish this with address conflicts proactively. Use collaborative approaches to resolve disputes. If it's land disputes, if it's cross-border disputes, which is a bit harder here. But conflict resolution should be definitely part of any participatory approach within post-conflict restoration planning also. So with that, I will stop and say restoration is beyond ecology. It's for people, resilience, and governance. So thank you very much. And I will stop sharing for now so I can see the screen also.
Thank you very, very much, Kama, for a comprehensive, very clear, very interesting, and all-inclusive presentation that reflects an enormous amount of experience that you have in the region. I'm sure there are a lot of very good questions and comments from the webinar participants. There is, we'll begin, and I have some myself, but I'll save those for later. But there was a comment or a question from Nikolai Denisov asking whether you have any experience to share regarding working in landscapes and ecosystems that have been physically damaged by conflict, unexploded ordnance, mines, fires, etc. Perhaps in southern Lebanon, perhaps in other regions where you've worked. So if you can comment on that, that would be great.
Yes, that would be more specifically in the south of Lebanon, where we had worked on abandoned quarries that were affected by a lot of shelling, mines, and bombing and wars. And it was a process of identifying. It was a success. Now I don't know the actual state of that this year, what happened, because it is on the southern areas and the borders of Lebanon. But I think when we were starting to plan the restoration process of this abandoned quarry, we thought of, okay, what are the species that will adapt to this high level of degradation that would support in restructuring the soil and improving soil health slowly. So our first step is we didn't want to really just put diversity and start having 20 species and just planting 20 species, and more than half would just die. And this is where we take genetic material into consideration, and the adaptation capability of each species to the degradation level. So we needed to think of, okay, which species would have faster root development, and we're still talking about native species. Which species are more tolerant to drought because soil was heavily degraded, that water infiltration and water retention in that soil was very poor. And it was a process of selecting those species first. And when we saw that we had less degradation and we were starting to see results on soil being more stabilized, healthier soil, this is where we kind of went to the second phase. So it was like a phased out kind of approach for restoration of post-conflict and very destructed habitats from wars. And then we gave it a chance to see if any kind of natural regeneration would happen also, instead of putting all the effort in and high cost, because it is a high cost when it's a completely destroyed area. So you need to really think of, okay, how to balance costs, but also slowly start improving soil. And once you improve that soil through key interventions, you can add further lower cost interventions for restoration. So yes, it is feasible. It sometimes it takes a lot of time, but never, for me, I would not go directly to the higher cost ones. I would go to the most, I would create a balance between cost and interventions. One thing in that area that after a few years of working on it, we did some research and soil eDNA testing on it. And from a very bare and destroyed abandoned quarry, after a few years, the soil eDNA test resulted in presence of native mycorrhizal species, ectomycorrhizal species, which for us is a good indication of soil health. So all of this together is, yes, you can do it. Be selective with your intervention, with the genetic material you want to use, genetic material that is adapted to these kind of the harshest condition ever. And then phase out, phase your project. Phase one, I will work on this. Phase two, if phase one worked, if I didn't need any adaptive management to it, then I can continue. So it's very site specific, but yes, it's something that can be done.
Hey, thank you, Kamai. There's another question that's come in from Stephanie Mansourian, but before I let you field that one, still on the subject of genetics and the, overriding importance of thinking of planning ahead and planning for conditions that could be even more harsh than they are now. Obviously, there's going to be a great need for planting material of provenances and so on of a number of species that perhaps cannot be found in where you're working. So my question is whether or not there is an opportunity, or perhaps already going on, a networking of organizations and institutions within the broader region to share genetic material and experiences to help to sort of shortcut the learning process too, as well as provide genetic material where it's needed.
You mean on the more on the regional level?
At the regional level, right? And this could be the sort of thing that IUFRO, for example, could be instrumental in connecting institutions and organizations to work on this.
Yeah. For now, this exchange on the regional level, and I might not be very maybe someone else knows better, but for me that exchange when it comes to genetic material in the under-region level is still very limited. We still promote the idea of native genetic material within each national border, if you want, not ecosystem border. But more and more, we've been talking about other with other partners from the region because we see some similar limitations and challenges. With our colleagues in Jordan, we talked about why is quercus not adapting. We have excellent seedlings, for instance. Why is in Lebanon and in Jordan survivor rate of quercus lower than before? So yes, talks about first finding the reasons why would be, I think, also very important before starting to talk about genetic material, but finding the real source of lower survivor rate or establishment of native material, and would be, I think, for me, would be something interesting. And yeah.
Great. Now we can continue that conversation later, and because I have some ideas about some earlier work that UFRO has been doing in collaboration with FAO in the region
I would
and
love that.
genetic material. So we can talk about that later. But our colleague Stephanie Mansourian had a question or a comment. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at that. Perhaps you could take a look at that and offer your.
I imagine that it is even more a challenge in post-conflict context because of more fundamental governance challenges, immediate pollution challenges, and lack of trust. So maybe pilot small-scale initiatives are more realistic. I totally agree, Stephanie. It's more realistic to have small-scale initiatives and small-scale scaling up kind of initiatives where we are not working on one type of habitat, but also trying to do that connectivity on a smaller scale to make people see that it works. And funny enough, I was in a meeting with my colleagues here in Lebanon a few days ago, and we were talking about that small scale scaling up approach. I'm not sure if I'm making sense now, but it's an area in the Bekaa of Lebanon where we have worked on riparian and then up to mountainous types of ecosystems where and in between you have a lot of agriculture lands. So yes, we have worked on agriculture lands. We have worked on improving forest resilience, and unfortunately, the hardest is the riparian because of a lot of displacements and refugee that are located around the river. Riparian habitats are the hardest to be able to restore. But we were just thinking, why not do a small scale from river to mountain, but on a smaller scale where we have multiple stakeholders involved, from farmers, from landowners, from refugees, from practitioners on the ground and researchers, and do that pilot. So I totally agree, Stephanie. If we don't start as a pilot, then yeah. So the idea here is connecting those mini pilots into one bigger pilot that represents connectivity between different habitats.
Great, thank you. There are no more questions in the chat, but if others have comments or questions, just raise your hand and we will acknowledge you and turn your cameras on, everyone, so we can see you.
There's one from Mariana on the chat also.
Okay, if you can.
And Stephanie, I hope I answered also your question.
Yeah, I had a follow-up question, if I may.
Oh,
but
yes.
Thank you. Yeah, I was thinking, so of course, scaling up is always a challenge, and small-scale pilots in any context do make a lot of sense. but I was just trying to imagine as I said, the pollution issues. So they add additional levels of complexity to the restoration process, which is complex enough as it is. And then the whole governance and lack of trust, social fabric having been affected, and therefore bringing in additional support from different disciplines, which, as you know, is something I'm really interested in. But also, yeah, I mean, you mentioned the need for conflict resolution, which it just adds those extra layers of complexity to the restoration process, but also means that you need to bring in different expertise, and which is part of the reason I think on a smaller scale it might be more realistic than immediately thinking of larger scales and scaling up, even if that's our ultimate objective in restoration because of the scale of ecosystem processes and everything.
Yes, and what we kind of also are hoping to do is with those, if we initiate those kinds of pilot and really assess the impact of those pilots, that we can bring it to higher decision makers where we can't work on stopping the pollution on rivers or in conflict areas. We can do that, but we can. So whenever we implement restoration, we want to also select sites where we won't fail, where we know we won't fail at the end. So in choosing pilots that we know where we won't fail and where pollution might be have lesser impact, we are hoping that with that kind of result, we can showcase it, and where the decision makers that have the decision and the power to do something about pollution will say, okay, I will invest in stopping pollution or decreasing pollution if you can actually replicate that pilot in those areas where I will work on decreasing pollution. For now, I think there's not such an initiative because we are really afraid of scaling up and promoting that kind of connectivity. But we need, at the same time, we need to start scaling up to show that it works, so that people that are taking and that can work on decreasing pollution can actually do that. So I'm not sure if it's answering also your question here, Stephanie. But this is our hope also.
Great, thank you, thank you. Do others have any questions or comments,
Right.
or observations? Or one thing that was occurring to me, I mean, there's so much in your presentation that that one could discuss this for a long time. But I was thinking of the traditional knowledge question, and how my understanding is that in most parts of the world, land managers don't really distinguish between forests and agricultural areas and water and other resources. It's already an integrated production system in most traditional systems. So in a lot of countries, all these functions are separated by different agencies or different government organizations. You have the agriculture versus forest versus environment versus water. So I was wondering, in your multi-stakeholder participatory planning, whether these sort of siloed approaches of government agencies interferes with these attempts to properly integrate for restoration purposes. If I hope that was clear.
So you mean on the higher the different
Yeah,
agencies?
more at the higher level. Does these sort of siloing of government agency functions interfere with the landscape level restoration efforts?
So yes, for instance, in Lebanon we have the Ministry of Agriculture, the Ministry of Environment, and the Ministry of Water and Energy that are kind of the main actors or on any kind of natural resources. So but what we try to do is at least have stakeholders that represent all those three main agencies or ministries also. So if I'm understanding correctly, your question, John, is how do we do that?
Yes, actually. I mean, it can be a challenge, because these government agencies have different interests and maybe not used to collaborating at the landscape.
It can be a challenge, but also there's a good kind of also relationship, I think, between local organizations and those agencies, the ministries. So far, I don't think it hindered any of our projects, but the main issue is to see which ministry we should we should get, we should involve, we should engage for that. And most probably it will be at least two, the Ministry of Agriculture and Environment. But they have different also priorities. But when you talk about such a small country like in Lebanon that is affected not only by climate change but by conflicts, this is where it becomes a bit more complex to work with multiple agencies and multiple ministries. So yes, there is a level of complexity for sure.
Thank you for that. I'm glad it's actually working for you for the most part. Marine, I think you had a question or a comment.
Thank you, Karma, for your great presentation. I'm working in Ukraine now. I mean, I have a project that is funded by the Swedish Research Council, and I have a Ukrainian team. And we are working also on this kind of landscape restoration, but mainly from the societal, social perspective, because our sort of hypothesis is that healthy communities, healthy ecosystems, and you come from another angle, healthy ecosystems, healthy communities. I mean, some kind of it integrated. And we focus on civic ecology practices, which is like a community-led restorative initiatives. And through this kind of interaction with nature, there is it has very important restorative effect on communities, but also on ecosystems. And I'm curious if you also you have examples of such civic ecology practices in Lebanon. And if people do, communities on a voluntary basis, if they do restorative work, what kind of work they do and what they plant, what they restore first. It would be interesting to learn from your experience. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So it is very much context-based also in Lebanon. We in every community we go into, or a group of communities, their objectives are different also. So there's not one approach to be able to do that, but what we have done from the beginning is always a participatory approach in planning. Sometimes some of the suggestions of the communities are not aligned with our objectives of restoration. But this is where we keep like an open communication channel with the local stakeholders and local communities. And sometimes, yes, it's hard to have everyone engaged and everyone agreeing with the work we're doing. But having constant presence within the local communities is important. So when we show them that we're not here for one day to talk and say, we're going to do this and we're going to implement this, but we're here most of the year. We are present with you most of the year. and we are monitoring together, we are planning together, we are implementing together. And a lot of the people, a lot of the community members, they're interested in joining the planting. They're interested in seeing, especially when they learn how this would be beneficial for them. We create like planting groups in each of those communities that are now more experienced with anyone that has learned reforestation, for instance. We kind of give them a sense of not empowerment, but responsibility also. When they feel responsible for something, and I know it's the same everywhere, but it's a very hard question to answer, to be honest, because it's it's very context specific. In some communities, we have no problem. And others, we just sometimes unfortunately decide, okay, let's not continue now. I think one example was in the Bekaa, I think, where we had two neighboring communities. One was very much engaged and one was not. We have put more effort with the one that was more engaged, and it was kind of when other communities saw the success and saw what was happening, everyone was like, okay, let's do this. So we want to do this. So yes, we created a pilot. We created a pilot with a community. Selecting your site is also very important, not only on the ecological level, but also on the social level. Which stakeholders will be engaged, will help you sustain your efforts. And you will find those stakeholders, but take it as a pilot. We take it as a pilot of success of how to integrate local stakeholders into our projects. And we saw some positive feedback from neighboring communities and villages that wanted to replicate this. So this alone, it could be a model for scaling up also.
Great, thank you, thank you. There were a couple more comments in the chat. I think Marvin Tejada's question was very much like mine, and I think you've answered that.
Yeah.
About and then Stephanie followed up with a comment regarding the opportunities that a post-conflict situation might present for collaboration. And if you want to say more about that, or just leave it as a comment. But
and there's also one from Mariana that I think I haven't. How can ecosystem restoration avoid reinforcing existing power imbalances or exclusion? Definitely.
Sorry.
Yeah, no. And do you have some examples? I did not put any examples here, but yes, it could reinforce existing power imbalances or exclusion. So I think this is within the participatory approach that we take, Mariana, where we have not only one type of stakeholders, but we focus on the micro community level also. So if you have in one village or two villages, different types of stakeholders or micro communities like farmers or landowners or fishermen or beekeepers also, these will all of them will be invited to this participatory approach, and I hope I'm understanding. So it doesn't really exclude any type of stakeholder, and we try to do like a stakeholder mapping ahead of time, and try to have representatives from each of those types of stakeholders, so we minimize the feeling of exclusion from one group. And yes, this is why micro community level to local community to local authority level is very important to have in one room. You have shepherds and the mayor. sitting in one room and discussing. So if we want to avoid exclusion of one group, we need to really think of not only having the local authorities or the higher level groups, stakeholder groups in an area, but also think of micro communities and how they would participate and engage.
Thanks. I think we're getting close to the end of our time, but I do want to ask Katarina Pinash, who had a question or comment to
Thank you.
join us.
Thank you. I want to ask you a question. Thank you, Karma, for your wonderful presentation. And my question it will be about slide where you speak about bare land and abundant agricultural lands. And if I remember correctly, that to whom belongs this land, and if they abandoned by farmers, how they can be restored after, and how you can start to work with that kind of land or restore it or something like that, and how it can be used after that, and it's become natural reservoir or something like that, and who can use it, or just become like, yeah, thanks.
Thank you for the question, Katerina. And a lot of the abandoned lands are considered unproductive lands, where just families or people, they would be private, but considered unproductive lands because of destruction, because of degradation, higher degradation, because that was led from very conventional practices and all of this. So people prefer to just not put money anymore on those lands and say, okay, I'm gonna shift to something else that would make me more money than this piece of land now. So the issue here is first to understand why it was abandoned, if it was just because of, and if the actual owners, because most probably it is a private land, are still in country or not. Also, there's a big immigration problem where those lands are abandoned because people just left, unfortunately. And we can see that in a lot of the areas in the MENA region and in conflict-affected region. But even if we cannot reach the landowners and if we cannot work with the landowners to improve the productivity of their lands through more of a restorative approach, we still need, I think personally, we still need to not disregard it and think, okay, this is a piece of land where I can't do any intervention, but if I do work around it, near it, still plan to be part of that connectivity, maybe as a natural process in the future, it could be restored also. So these are just maybes, but definitely the first reason why they do abandon those lands, you have two reasons. One, that they become very unproductive and the cost of producing is more than the revenue. And this is actually interesting because we can support through ecosystem-based adaptation and restoration planning, such as agroecological principles. And the other one, which is a bit harder for us, is when people just immigrate to abroad or outside, where we don't have any control of it.
Great, thank you so much, Kama.
Thank you.
So I'm afraid we have run out of time, but I would like to, on behalf of everyone, all the many participants who stayed on for the full hour and a half, I'd like to thank you so much for a wonderful presentation and a very informed and informative discussion afterwards. Really appreciate everything you're doing, and these days under very difficult conditions. So just thank you from the point of view of IUFRO and the task force. It's been very, very good. And for those who are still on the line, this webinar series continues, and I believe we'll have a recording of this session posted on the website for the IUFRO task force. So check that out. So big round of applause for Kama and best
And
of
thank
best of
you.
luck with your ongoing efforts. Much
Thank
appreciated.
you. Thank you for the amazing questions, everyone.
Thank you, Karma. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.